Welcome back to Upside Down Data. We need to talk about Cardano. If you're not familiar, Cardano is a layer 1 blockchain. That means that it is a place that people can build decentralized applications on top of it, like decentralized finance, and also launch tokens and things like that. And Cardano made the choice to really prioritize decentralization and security, though they do have some improvements in the works that should be out relatively soon to make it much faster, more scalable, cheaper as well. And Cardano was one of the darlings of the last cycle. Cardano performed very well from 2020 into 2021, but then of course endured a brutal bear market. Now, it is also an asset that has really benefited from this election boost that we've seen. Currently, ADA is up around 232% to the upside. It was up as much as about 300% to the upside. So ADA is the native token of Cardano. It has been doing quite well. But of course, the question that everyone's asking is what's going to happen next? We don't really care about the past. That's not very useful anymore. What's going to happen in the future? So I want to go ahead and break down what some of our models are seeing and also what some of the on-chain data are seeing for ADA. So to start off with one of our models, I want to talk about our momentum bias indicator, or MBI. So that's what you're seeing here. Basically, positive values mean positive momentum bias, negative values mean negative momentum bias. And by momentum bias, what I really mean is which direction is momentum prevailing? Is it prevailing to the upside like you see in bull markets, or is it prevailing to the downside like you see in bear markets? And you tend to see very distinct patterns of behavior on this metric depending on where you are in the market cycle. So when you're in a bear market, you spend a lot more time in the red than in the green. So basically negative momentum dominating, pulling prices down. And then in bull markets, you spend a lot more time in the green than in the red. And then you have this very interesting behavior when you transition out of bear markets and into bull markets, you'll kind of oscillate around zero. And that's really the phase that we're coming out of. Kind of the bear market, then we kind of had this oscillation around zero. And now we've exploded to the upside, much like we did in the beginning of the parabolic phase here back in 2020 into 2021. Very strong positive momentum bias. So we'd like to see continue here is as we might kind of see this roll over and move down, have it reverse back to the upside, stay in the green, or at the very least, if it dips into the red, very quickly reverse back up into the green as well. That would be characteristic of a bull market. What get really concerning is if we get into the deep red, and especially if we stay there for a while. Now, it can also be useful to watch the absolute level of this metric because it can tell you when you're getting to extreme points in momentum, and oftentimes those can act as local tops. You'll see we actually got to the most extreme value ever for ADA on the MBI back over here in this big run up. Now we're falling back down. Now, that doesn't mean by any means that the cycle top is in or anything like that. Last cycle, we got to our momentum top at the end of this big parabolic phase, and then we did end up grinding higher to what was the ultimate all-time high in September. Now, that kind of thing could play out again. You get this big explosive move up, you might see momentum bias start to come down again, but that doesn't preclude the possibility of another big spike up or anything like that. But what it might suggest is that things might need to cool off a bit for ADA before we see another really explosive move. We see, for example, here, a big spike up, then it took some time before we kind of recharge and we're able to move up aggressively again. And you'll see that again over here, big spike up, spend some time consolidating before that next big push up. You might see the same thing happen here. Massive move up, some time consolidating before the next big move up as well. Getting really high in the MBI is not necessarily bearish in and of itself, but it is something that you want to watch out for, that when you get too extreme, you at the very least might expect some consolidation. We've seen some correction already. You might see that continue. But ultimately, if we are still in the parabolic phases of a bull market, that's somewhat of a shorter term concern. And I think there's other data we can look at that suggests that it seems unlikely that ADA is at its top right now, or at least based on if we're going to use the last cycle as a guide, this does not look much like that. So let's go ahead and break down those data. So the first thing I want to talk about is the percent of total supply in profit for ADA. So this is on-chain data. It basically looks at the chain itself and says, okay, just looking literally at the ledger, how many people are in profit versus loss? What percentage of holders? And what you can see is that in bull markets, you'll get to these points where basically everyone is in profit. Very high percent or 100% of people are in profit. But the good news is that the market can sustain that for a while. You'll see the first time we spiked up nearly to 100% in this prior cycle was right at the beginning of the parabolic phase. And then all throughout that parabolic phase, we kind of danced around those really high numbers, basically 100%, multiple times. And then we had this bit of a correction, and then ultimately we got to the all-time over here. But you can see that we played with that level for a long time. So just getting there does not mean a top signal by any means. In fact, it's a sign of strength oftentimes, and then you'll have some amount of time to run before you might actually go into the bear market. And what we've seen with this big move up is this is kind of the first time that we're again flirting with those really high values. Now, notably, if we are going to use the last cycle as a guide, you will see that this first big move up that ADA put in into the summer of 2020 got up to the similar levels. We actually had a pretty notable correction before we got up to that more parabolic phase that we saw here, ultimately leading us to all-time highs. So there is a possibility of something like that this time around. We were just talking about how it might not be surprising to see some correction and consolidation here. An extreme version of that would be something like this before ultimately going to the all-time high, but it wouldn't be unprecedented. And I think that would be something where if we saw a correction like this, a lot of people would say, well, that was it. ADA's done. That's it. Pack it in for the cycle. And it still could end up going in a parabolic phase. Something you tend to see in bull markets is actually Bitcoin tends to really lead the way, and then altcoins will follow afterwards. And so it might seem like we're already in the full-on phases of an alt season right now, that Bitcoin's kind of done what it's going to do. We don't know that yet. It's actually possible that Bitcoin could actually be the thing that then explodes next, kind of suck a lot of the liquidity out of altcoins back into Bitcoin, go on a run. That's where you'd see something like ADA continue to correct here, maybe see this come down like we saw before. And then once you actually get the proper alt season, that's when things shift back again, and then things explode, and you get all the way up to 100% on this metric. So it's something to keep an eye on, but I don't think that this on its own suggests that we're at the top per se, or at least looking at last cycle as a guide, that would not be the first conclusion you would draw. Obviously not financial advice, though. You should make of these data as you will. Now, another piece of data we can look at to give us also useful insight is looking at the network realized profit and loss. So I'm actually going to go ahead and pull that up here first. This is just basically in US dollar amount. What is the amount of profit or loss that's being realized on the network? So what I like to do is actually denominate it instead in ADA. So basically to do that, the formula is just take the network realized profit or loss and divide it by the price of ADA. And this will be basically the number of ADA sold, or amount of ADA profit sold or loss that were sold or realized at a given point in time. It kind of just normalizes the data set. But then what I like to do is very spiky and noisy. I like to apply a moving average. So that's what this formula is here. Just going to go ahead and get rid of this one and pull that one up. And we get this very nice metric that tells us, I've done this over 90 days. So over a 90-day period, so basically a 3-month period, how much profit or loss is being realized on the network. So 0 is here. Above that would be a lot of profit taking. Below that, a lot of loss realization. You'll see that in the bottoms of bear markets, you have a lot of losses that are being realized, a lot of capitulation. Basically, people selling who had bought at the top, selling at deep loss. And then vice versa. In bull markets, a lot of profit taking happening of people who bought much lower. And so what this can give us an idea of is in the last cycle, we saw that it only was able to get to so high of profit taking before it really kind of slowed down ADA's momentum. And ultimately, though we did end up going and setting an all-time high here, close to $3, we then went into the bear market. We weren't really able to explosively move beyond this level that we got to back here in early 2021. Now, the good news is that we're seeing nowhere near that amount of profit taking so far this time. We're not even close to it, in fact. We're nowhere near even this intermediate top, to say nothing of this one. Now, part of that is market structure dependent. A lot of people bought ADA up here, and so they can't sell at a profit right now because the price hasn't gotten above them yet. So really the only people who can sell at a profit right now are people who bought in this bear market, and also anyone who's left over from down here. So really, but to see that amount of profit taking happening, we'd actually might need to see ADA get to new all-time highs so that people, even people who bought up in here, can start selling at a profit. But currently, we're not seeing that yet. And so basically, if you think that massive profit taking is a prerequisite for a top to form, we're not seeing that yet. And that is, I think, a hopeful sign. Though, of course, as I was mentioning, part of that has to do with the current state of the market and the fact that we might actually need to see higher prices before it's even possible to see that amount of profit taking. So the final thing I want to talk about is related to the metric that we're just talking about. What I want to talk about is the realized market cap of ADA as it relates to the market cap of ADA. So if you're not familiar, market cap is just basically the price of ADA multiplied by the circulating supply. However many ADA are there out in circulation, multiply that by price. That's your market cap. It's basically an idea of how much is the network valued. That if somehow you could sell all of the ADA for the current price, that would never happen in reality. But if you, in theory, could, how much money would it all be worth? That's basically the idea. It's the same as is done with stocks. And then the realized cap is basically the realized price of ADA. So it's basically the cost basis of all ADA that exists multiplied by the circulating supply. So realized price is if I sell an ADA today, then someone buys it at the current price, and that becomes that person's cost basis. So that's why you can think of the total realized price as the total cost basis for ADA. Just on average, what is the price at which people bought their ADA? And then realized cap, as I mentioned before, is just multiplying that by circulating supply. And what this really does, and what it allows us to look at, is what is the dollar amount, the market cap amount difference between people's what they bought in for and what it's currently worth. So basically the teal line here is the value of ADA in terms of where people actually bought it. So basically people actually buying ADA, what is the total value at which people actually bought it, sold it, that kind of thing. And then the white line is the current actual market cap. So what we can do with this Formula One, what I'm showing you here, is we actually look at the difference between these to see what is the difference between ADA's current market cap and what that market cap is in terms of people's actual cost basis. And so what I did then with the second formula is I just applied a moving average to kind of smooth out some of that noise. And that's what this red line is here. What this is basically telling you is how much profit in terms of actual US dollar amounts are people sitting on. So there's some amount of ADA that are out there. They're all being held by someone, and it's all worth some amount of money. How much money is that? And how much of that is in profit or loss? You'll see that in bear markets, when the white line is below the teal line, there's massive losses that people are sitting on. So for example, at the bottom of this bear market, people are sitting on almost $18 billion of loss in ADA. But then at the last bull market at the top, people are sitting at about $33 billion in profit over this 30-day window. And we can look and see that that's happening again. We're again at a gain, at profit for the network. And the network on paper, in terms of unrealized gains, is sitting at about 12, almost $13 billion worth of profit. And I think this is useful to keep an eye on because we can see how it will relate to last cycle. The last top, we saw that it really got up to this very extreme level where we're seeing actually at the peak here on this 30-day window, $42 billion at the top. Quite extreme. We're nowhere near that yet. And so if it takes people being on aggregate in profit that much to finally put in a top and have selling pressure ultimately then dominate and drive us into a bear market, we're not at that level yet. We're not at that level of overall profit so that people are just selling, selling, selling. No demand can step in to stop the bleeding. So when I look across all of these metrics, what I'm seeing here is that we're not sitting at as much of profit as a network as last time, which might suggest that we have more room to move before we might expect a top to form if we use last cycle as a guide. We're also seeing that profit taking is just not as elevated yet as it was last cycle, nowhere close to it. We're seeing that percentage of holders in profit is getting elevated, but that tends to happen early in a bull market and then persists for a while until you actually get to the top. And though we're seeing momentum getting really extreme, we know that we can still go higher despite that. So that's where, when I'm looking at this, by no means does this look like, you know, the bottom of a bear market or early bull market. Those days are behind us. When we look across these data, it also doesn't seem like it's the base case should be that we have seen a top for ADA yet in this bull market. So I'm going to be watching these data closely, and of course I will update my view once the data suggests that we might be at a top, but I'm not seeing that yet. I think that when you look at these data, they suggest that ADA probably, much more likely than not, in my opinion, though of course not financial advice, has more room to run this cycle than not, though it would not surprise me at all, I was mentioning before, to see some kind of short-term correction consolidation before we end up seeing that. In fact, I would actually think that would be healthy to see something like that happen. A healthy path forward would be for Bitcoin to lead the way up again, actually suck liquidity back out of altcoins, and then that just creates an even bigger hot ball of money to then dump into altcoins like ADA and send them up in a full-on alt season. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. A lot of updates from our models and more over there. You can go to our website, polaritydigital.io, to see live data from our models and on-chain data for ADA and more over there. This is unique to Polarity Digital. Very few places have on-chain data for ADA, Cardano. We have it.